Chris Duffin and Brady Cable with Kabuki Strength coming at you. So today I want to talk about what's a little bit glutes, but more specifically hips. But the conversation gets started because so many people are always focused on glutes, glute firing. And I understand, from powerlifting, barbell sport, heck, almost any sport, like glutes are a big fire of hip extension, right? Hip extension is how we deliver power. We get all this focus on it. Wouldn't you agree? Pretty important. So you'll notice from like many years past, I've always been promoting a lot of stuff that is not just glute, but also adductor engagement. So go back to some really old videos around like hip airplanes, hip side shifts, and then more recently shin box. Some of our favorite go-to, diagonal sits, shin box get-ups, and then more recently, I'd say in the last year or two, we've gotten some very specific adductor drills like the Copenhagen adduction drill and stuff like that we've been promoting. And so again, all these videos are on kabuki.ms. But what we found in like quite some time and continue to do is like working that balance of the adductor and glute together helps control hip function. And then more recently, just finding more and more just like how powerful the adductor is in resetting hip function. And by resetting hip function, I mean like if you've got an internal or external rotational deficit, like we can clear some of that up. And how do we clear it up? We get those adductors firing better. And so if we think about that, let's just take this a step further, like, hey, my glutes aren't firing. We see that people like always focused on, they've got their firing drills before they exercise or their glute firing work, especially the Fitspos and all that. But if they're not working, why, or working as well as you would like, that's because we're putting the hip into extension. And as you do that, that can put those muscles of the groin, particularly the adductors, at a compromised position. So if you're weak, think about this from a neurology standpoint. If you are weak in the adductors, weak in your groin muscles, what is your body going to do? So those of you who may not be familiar with some of our terminology, we call it traction control, but you can find some speeches or articles on that. But what happens is the body detunes if there's a weakness. So if we're weak here, the body's going to detune the glute so you're not firing hard into extension. So all that extra work that you're doing might be for naught. You might just be weak in the groin, the adductors, and you actually need to work that area. And that's why we've been, focus a lot of that on our warm-up and training, and the results speak for themselves. So Brady, you have some thoughts to add on this?
Yeah, it's important to have that balance. I mean, like any muscle group. So if you're only ever working and using your glutes, you're really biasing towards hip abduction, and you don't have this balance and this kind of opposing tension to create stability in that joint from the adductors too. So that's where you're going to get that down regulation of function in your dynamic movements, like your squats, your deadlifts, jumps, anything like that.
Yeah. And so what brings out this conversation is in the last couple of months, if you watch some of my deadlifts, I've had some hip side shift. And people asking, how are you cleaning that up? Because one session will be there when I didn't do my prep work or was consistent with it, and then it disappears or goes down. And a lot of people, if you look at like hip side shift, they're always focusing on glute firing via some RNT activity, or there's a lot of different ways to approach it, but it's all about getting that to fire. And I've actually, to clean it up, I do exactly the opposite. I work these right here, and boom, now all of a sudden that hip shifting is fixed for me. But yeah, to Brady's point, and you'll see this in a lot of our drills that we use, or the way that we play with a number of drills as we move through some rolling patterns and stuff like that. It's all about, boom, hitting these two to balance and control that hip. But I'm really believing that this is becoming, to me, like, I think we need an adductor guy.
Not just a glute guy?
not just a glute guy, but an adductor guy. So it's all important. We can't focus too much on one area.
Yeah, I mean, so if you're having trouble controlling your knee position too, for example, if you're only ever having this tension pulling outwards and you're not having something pull it back into line, you can't have that stable joint position and keeping it under control. So you'll constantly be wavering between your glute and your adductor tension. They won't be working in unison.
Well, I think we've hit this conversation pretty well. So, any last thoughts before we close it up, Brady?
We got it.
All right. Don't neglect that groin.